r/AskReddit Doctors of Reddit. What was your how the f***ck did you survive that moment? Intern year doing surgery. Guy gets brought in for a gunshot wound to the head. He was working at a jeweler that got robbed. His coworker was black bagged at the scene. He gets brought into the trauma bay and it's pretty hectic because GSW to the head and well he's alive. Not only is he alive, he's following commands but not speaking, probably from the shock. Cops are giving us reports saying he was likely shot with a .357 snub nose they recovered at the scene. So we do our primary and secondary survey and all this guy has is a single wood wound to his left frontal scalp where the bullet went in. So the team hasn't really seen something like this before. Sure, a GSW to the head wasn't new, but this guy was otherwise completely fine. The decision was made to get a quick frontal and late head x-ray to verify where the bullet was before proceeding to court. Well, we don't see any bullet on the films. There's no bullet on the board or bed or within the patient's clothes. Sounds like it hit his skull at a tangential angle and basically damaged the skin, but grazed the bone. Unbelievable. Unless he's Wolverine. I mean, that's a possibility. It could also have hit something first, ricocheted off and hit his head with much less force, enough to break the skin, but not the bone. I remember the patient having powder burns around the wound, so yeah, unlikely it ricocheted off something. This happened back in 2015, but definitely remember the powder burns, and that detectives were present, which wasn't always the case. Looking back at it, it makes sense they were there. With the powder burn, they assumed he may have witnessed the shooters, since he was shot at point blank. I'm sure detectives say way crazier shit than us, or at least see it more often. I remember they couldn't believe it either. I was working in the emergency department when a toddler came in after falling out of a 3-story window completely unharmed. The sad thing was they were from a rough neighborhood and the mum hadn't noticed for about half an hour. Apparently the friendly apartment pot smokers found him, checked him over, and sat with him for half an hour, and when mum didn't show up, went to find her. The child was admitted overnight, mostly for social reasons, but it's just amazing how well kids bounce. Accurate. My dad used to do this to me. If I got hurt, he'd tell me I'm fine. So after a while I'd graze all the skin off at school and continued playing until a teacher saw me. But now, if I get hurt, it seems to really hurt. Every time I think this question, the answer is usually meth. One guy got hit in the face hard enough to let air into his brain cavity and was being an absolute asshole, which seemed to be normal for him, and literally asked, "Got any meth?" When I offered some pain relief. To my understanding, he recovered without any need for surgery. The human body is both scarily resilient and scarily fragile. Last Sunday, I got vestibular neuritis. What this means is a single nerve in my head got an infection. One nerve. A tiny little nerve. That made my balance go haywire, resulting in a week of vomiting and being unable to stand or walk, and basically being a vegetable. But this guy lets fucking air into his brain cavity and is perfectly fine. I was a surgical resident in a small town hospital. We got paged to see a patient for a spared piece of driftwood through the leg. We were thinking it was a nicked femoral artery and discussing if this poor kid needed amputation. When we saw him, he was standing on the skewered leg taking a piss. Turns out the wood missed every single one of the vital vessels and no fracture, just muscular damage. Did you just come around a corner in the hallway and he was pissing on the wall, or did you chase him into the bathrooms? Not a doctor yet, but I worked in a trauma center as a scribe before starting med school. Basically, I was attached at the hip with a doctor to do their documentation. One guy wrecked his car into a wooden fence, and a wooden fence post went in his mouth and came out the back of his neck. It was the kind of fence post that was double the size of his mouth. It had basically pushed all of the important anatomy to the side as it impaled him. There were consulting doctors for like 10 different specialties working on this guy in the hospital. Several weeks later, after he fully recovered, he walked back in the emergency department to thank everyone. Emergency nurse. Once had a guy come in who had been cutting a tree with a chainsaw when it hit a knot in the wood and kicked up into his neck. Finished cutting the tree because he knew his wife would make him get rid of the chainsaw. Put a towel on it and drove himself to the hospital. Court showed no vascular damage, simple washout and home the next day. One of the paramedics who saw him said to his patient, "That's a real emergency. Why don't we ever get those?" Finished cutting the tree because he knew his wife would make him get rid of the chainsaw. Reminds me of a story I heard from a teacher. He knew a farmer who got his hand caught in some machinery and mangled it up pretty good. Put a glove on over his hand to keep it one piece while he finished his work, then went to the hospital. Not a doctor. My dad, who is one, told me this story once. He has this 12-year-old patient, let's call him Tim, and everyone in the hospital firmly believes he's immortal. Tim was born with a bad heart and is constantly in and out of the ICU. By in and out of the ICU, he goes in almost once or twice a month. 9 out of 10 admissions, Tim flatlines. Strangely, Tim always comes back, even if you don't resuscitate him. I'd say Tim flatlined about 15-ish times in total. It's at the point that whenever Tim flatlines, nobody panics. Not even his mom, and the first 3 times she fell on the floor crying. Hey guys, Tim's vitals are dropping. Again. Woo, that kid's definitely going for a record. Tim's pretty chill about it too. He talks about his IQ trips like how a normal kid talks about a mildly eventful day at school. Nobody knows how TF does Tim always come back. He just does. Frankly, I'm surprised the media hasn't done a story about it. BC, it's fucking metal. First year of my core surgical training, I was on call in a very small rural hospital. This hospital only had 2 doctors on at night, me and a medical trainee, and no emergency doctors. It's about 11 PM and this guy, 26, comes in after being in a fight. Blood pumping from his nose, which was clearly fractured. I suspected he probably had other facial fractures underneath, but he was awake and talking to me, otherwise seemed fine. I spent about 45 minutes trying to stop the blood, using all sorts of nose packs, pressure, even tried a catheter balloon to try and tamponade it. Nothing was working, and he was starting to go into shock, and I was basically shitting myself at this stage. Based on his vitals, I'd estimated he'd lost almost 1.5 liters of blood so far. Nearest proper surgical hospital was 45 minutes away, and my consultant was at home, 25 minutes from the hospital. Eventually I got 4 bags of own egg from the lab. The lab tech happened to be in, which was very lucky. Put this guy in the back of an ambulance, still bleeding, and sent him blow light to the surgical center in the city. Got a phone call about 3 hours later from a surgeon at the other hospital, saying he had brought the patient to theater and been able to control the situation. He was probably 15 minutes from dead. If you come into that kind of small hospital with that much bleeding, all stats say you're in trouble. The guy was very lucky his friends got him in so quickly. That's the worst thing about working in a rural hospital. Not only are you understaffed, but people in rural communities always have the most inventive, gnarliest injuries. Well done for saving his life. Not a doctor but paramedic. Once went a car wreck where a drunk drove headfirst into the corner of a brick bridge at 100 miles per hour. Took a huge wedge out of the bottom of the bridge and left the car about 1/4 of its normal length. All the impact was on the driver's side. Turned up only 2 minutes after the crash and fully expected it to be a fatality. Walked round to the driver's side and somehow he was fully conscious, but squeezed into the only space left in the car. Took almost 3 hours to get him out, and on extracting him out he had absolutely nothing wrong with him other than being a pissed up asshole. Still think, how the fuck did he survive that? I've seen a photo of a similar situation. Serious accident, multi-car on a highway. When they realized there was a crunched vehicle between 2 other vehicles, these vehicles were each half their original size from impacts. They assumed the person inside the barely seeable vehicle was liquefied. I don't know the accident details other than that. Not a doctor yet, but during one of my night shift as a medical student, I had to take in charge a patient who came to the ER for a car accident. Well, that's quite common. What is not is that he came by himself from 40 kms by calling a taxi because his car was absolutely wrecked in the accident. Normally, when your car ends up upside down after 2 or 3 rollovers at 60 km/h, which the patient did, you are not really fine. However, he was totally okay. No broken bone, no head trauma, no abdominal pain, nothing. He just came to the because he had little dermabrasions over his knees and one elbow, and it hurts when it rubs against my clothes. 3 band-aids later, and he was good to go. Gotta be the seatbelt that saved him. Eater, airbags probably too. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for I upload daily, and suggest what subreddit I should cover next. Thank you and happy travels.